This is a subscription-only audiobook podcast featuring Nicola reading each chapter of her book, Unmasking Leadership, Neurodivergent Leaders, Psychological Safety, and the Future of Inclusive Workplaces. This series is for listeners who want to understand how leadership, safety, and inclusion actually operate beneath the surface. The book explores how neurodivergent people experience work, why psychological safety often fails in practice, and how systems designed to protect people can instead create harm. Chapters are released regularly and are presented in full, allowing the ideas to be heard without simplification or sound bites. Thank you for choosing to listen in full.
Chapter 21, Women Who Lead Differently. Recent data show a marked increase in diagnoses of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, among women and gender diverse people, long after childhood and often in adulthood. For example, a 20-year review of statewide data in the United States found that the proportion of autistic females diagnosed between 2000 and 2021 rose at a faster rate than males, though the age of diagnosis remained significantly higher for females. These figures reflect not necessarily a sudden surge in prevalence, but rather a major shift in awareness, referral pathways, and diagnostic criteria. For decades, diagnostic criteria were based on male presentations, externalized hyperactivity, blunt communication, or restricted interests. Women and gender diverse people often present differently. Internalized anxiety, people pleasing, or chronic overachievement. As a result, many women in leadership discover their neurodivergence later in life, often after burnout or breakdown. These are not new conditions, they are newly recognized truths. Me. It is me. Leading as a neurodivergent woman means carrying the expectations of two systems at once: the gendered model of leadership, which still rewards warmth and diplomacy, and the neurotypical model, which rewards composure and sociability. The combination is unsustainable. Many neurodivergent women describe a lifetime of performing competence. They were the good girls, the achievers, the ones who never wanted to disappoint. Perfectionism became both protection and identity. In leadership, that drive translates into high achievement and control. Yet behind the polished exterior, many are running on adrenaline and fear of failure. Perfectionism in this context is not pride, it is a trauma response. It develops from years of equating acceptance with performance. This pattern has deep roots. Cultural conditioning teaches women to smooth conflict, manage emotion, and carry relational labor. Neurodivergent women do all of that while managing sensory overload and executive function challenges. They become experts in effort. The cost is invisible burnout, what researchers call functional exhaustion, where competence remains but vitality disappears. Masking as survival, then identity for women. Masking often begins as self-protection and evolves into identity. It is reinforced by social reward, being agreeable, flexible, and emotionally attuned. In leadership, these traits are praised, but they come with a hidden price: constant self-monitoring and suppression. Autistic and ADHD women in leadership report higher rates of anxiety, depression, and chronic fatigue, linked to prolonged masking, Higgins et al. 2021. Many describe feeling like they are playing multiple characters: the decisive executive, the empathetic mentor, the calm communicator. Unmasking, therefore, is not simply about dropping the act. It requires rebuilding identity outside of performance. It means learning to separate real strengths from survival strategies, bias and double standards. Gender bias amplifies neurodivergent bias. When women display directness or intensity, it is often labeled emotional or aggressive. When they show sensitivity, it is seen as weakness. Neurotypical men exhibiting the same behaviors are often described as visionary or passionate. Research on leadership evaluation confirms that women are more harshly judged for identical behaviors, especially when deviating from expected norms. Eagley and Carley, 2007. For neurodivergent women who may communicate bluntly or express emotion atypically, these biases multiply. Bias also affects perception of credibility. An autistic woman's precision may be read as rigidity, while an ADHD woman's enthusiasm may be dismissed as impulsive. These misinterpretations create cognitive dissonance between self perception and external feedback, fueling imposter syndrome.
If you are finding this series useful, subscribing really helps. It means you get each new chapter as it's released, and it signals to the platform that this content is worth sharing. Leaving a quick review also makes a genuine difference to Nicola. Reviews help this reach a wider audience, especially people who are looking for leadership, psychological safety, and neurodiversity content that goes deeper than sound bites. Thank you for supporting independent work like this. Back to the chapter.
The burnout cycle. The burnout trajectory for neurodivergent women in leadership often follows a pattern: overcommitment, overperformance, emotional depletion, and collapse. Each recovery period is followed by guilt and renewed overcompensation. Higgins et al., 2021, describe autistic burnout as a state of chronic exhaustion, loss of skills, and reduced tolerance to stimuli. Many women experience this invisibly, maintaining productivity until physical or mental shutdown. Breaking the cycle requires structural and personal interventions, redefining success to include rest and recovery, setting realistic workload boundaries, reframing self-worth around value, not validation, seeking environments that support authenticity rather than performance. Burnout is not failure. It is evidence of a system that rewards over-adaptation and punishes honesty. Women leaders, especially those who are neurodivergent, often possess deep cognitive empathy, the ability to understand systems and anticipate consequences. Yet workplace cultures still privilege social empathy, eye contact, tone, and expressiveness. True empathy in leadership is about attunement, not performance. It means recognizing distress signals in teams, maintaining boundaries, and responding with predictability. Neurodivergent women often excel here, but their empathy is rarely recognized because it looks different. Authority, too, must be redefined. Authority does not require constant composure or charisma. It requires credibility, competence, and the courage to communicate truthfully. Neurodivergent women model this every day when they lead with honesty and directness despite bias, creating systems that support. Women leaders organizations can support neurodivergent women in leadership through specific, evidence-based measures. 1. Flexible leadership rhythms allow senior leaders to manage energy through flexible scheduling, remote focus days, and clear boundaries between high demand and recovery periods. 2. Coaching and peer networks provide confidential coaching with professionals trained in neurodiversity and gender dynamics. Encourage peer mentoring among women who share lived experience. 3. Visibility without tokenism. Celebrate neurodivergent women in leadership roles for their contributions, not their diagnoses. Representation should inspire, not isolate. 4. Leadership education for boards. Train boards and executives on bias and cognitive diversity to prevent misinterpretation of leadership styles. 5. Organizational redesign. Integrate inclusive design principles into executive workflows. Predictable meetings, clear decisions, and controlled sensory environments. These actions signal that authenticity is compatible with authority. Women who are neurodivergent leaders are not rare exceptions. They are evidence of a system that underestimated difference for too long. Their stories rewrite leadership history from the margins inward. Reclaiming that narrative means acknowledging both the brilliance and the burden of leading differently. It means celebrating the analytical mind that sees patterns no one else can, and validating the exhaustion that comes from constantly translating that brilliance into a neurotypical language. Authenticity is not a destination, it is a practice. For neurodivergent women in leadership, it begins with permission to be both exceptional and human, to lead without apology.
A quick pause before we continue. If you would like practical tools to support neurodivergent thinking at work, there are free resources available on nicolanobel.com. These include downloadable guides and templates designed to support focus, regulation, and safer ways of working. You can download them now, no subscription required. Now back to the chapter.
My own disclosure and unmasking at work. People often talk about disclosure as if it's a single moment. The day you finally tell the truth, the day you come out as neurodivergent, the day you find freedom. And while that moment matters, what comes after it is far less tidy. When I first disclosed at work that I was seeking an autism and ADHD diagnosis, it was in many ways a non-event. There was no dramatic pause or awkward silence, just a brief acknowledgement and a sense of business continuing as usual. That suited me. I had been clear and factual. I was in the process of getting a formal diagnosis, and I wanted to ensure any future discussions about support or adjustments were transparent from the start. What surprised me was how unremarkable it felt. After years of masking and anticipating discomfort, I had imagined disclosure as something seismic. Instead, it was steady, professional, and pragmatic, the same way I approach most aspects of my work. But beneath that calmness was quiet relief. By naming it early, I took back control of the narrative before anyone else could define it for me. For me, disclosure wasn't about seeking permission or sympathy. It was about alignment between who I am, how I work best, and how I lead. And in that sense, the lack of spectacle was the best possible outcome. No one really prepares you for the after. When I first began talking about being autistic and ADHD, I thought I was stepping into alignment. I imagined that once I said it out loud, things would make sense, that the people who respected me would still respect me, and that I'd simply be leading as my more authentic self. In many ways, that has been true. But it's also been confronting in ways I didn't expect. Unmasking as a leader is not like unmasking in private. You can't just take off the mask and exhale. Leadership roles come with constant visibility, constant scrutiny, and constant need to regulate how you show up. It's hard to unmask when you are still being watched. There are moments when I feel strong in this, when I talk openly about how my brain works, or when I design meetings that actually work for mine. There are also days when I wish I could retreat, where the vulnerability feels raw and the effort of holding it all together feels endless. People sometimes imagine that diagnosis brings relief, and in a way it does, but it also brings grief. The grief of realizing how hard you've been working to keep up. The grief of seeing how much of your professionalism was actually survival. Before my diagnosis, I held everything together through perfectionism, adrenaline, and the illusion of control. I built systems in my head that no one could see, the constant scanning, the post-meeting debriefs, the rehearsed empathy, the silent processing of every tone and gesture. I thought that was what leadership was, staying one step ahead of collapse. When you finally start to unmask, the scaffolding you built begins to fall away. It's liberating, but also destabilizing. The energy that once went into masking is no longer there to keep everything propped up. And that is when you notice what people warned you about, but you didn't really believe. The loss of executive function that follows. They told me this would happen. Other autistic and ADHD professionals had said, when you stop masking, you'll feel worse before you feel better. I didn't believe them. I thought, I've got too many coping strategies. I'll be fine. I wasn't fine. In fact, I audibly hissed at someone. Realistically, when you spend decades masking, you build your entire system around it. You use anxiety as fuel, urgency as a compass, and adrenaline as focus. When you finally take that away, when you stop pushing, pleasing, and performing, you crash. The exhaustion catches up. The executive function you thought was a strength reveals itself as borrowed energy. That has been the hardest part of this process for me. I am a professional who writes, teaches, and speaks about leadership and safety, and yet I still lose track of simple things. I forget to eat. I forget to pee. I stare at emails for far too long. I leave half-drunk cups of coffee all over my house like they're part of a scavenger hunt. For someone whose identity has always been tied to competence and achievement, that is confronting. There is an old reflex that still kicks in. The part of me that wants to apologize, over-explain, and prove that I'm still capable. It takes constant work to remind myself that capability was never the problem. Capacity was. Unmasking doesn't make you less capable. It makes you aware of the cost you've been paying for appearing capable all the time.
Let's take a quick break here. If you would like to support this work, you can head to nicolanobel.com to check out the book, subscription options, and a small range of merch designed for neurodivergent thinkers and leaders. Your support helps keep this project independent and accessible. Now back to the chapter.
I still struggle with this every day. Some mornings I wake up determined to lead in alignment with who I really am. By the afternoon, I'm back to masking through a meeting because I don't have the bandwidth to educate anyone that day. Some days I can talk openly about sensory overload or burnout prevention. Other days I revert to my polished script because it feels safer than being misunderstood. This is the part no one writes about, the in-between, the messy middle, where authenticity is both healing and exhausting, where freedom and fear coexist. Unmasking isn't a destination. It is maintenance. It is the daily negotiation between self-compassion and survival, between what feels honest and what feels safe. I wish I could tell you that I've mastered it, that there's a perfect point where disclosure becomes effortless and unmasking feels natural. But I haven't. I don't think any of us ever fully do. What I can tell you is that even in the hardest moments, I no longer feel fraudulent. When I lose track of something now, I don't spiral into shame. I ask for help, or I apologize without explanation, or I rebuild the system so it's more forgiving next time. That's leadership too, not perfection, but repair. Being a neurodivergent leader means accepting that your brain is both your greatest asset and your greatest teacher. It means leading yourself through the same compassion you extend to everyone else. It means owning the truth that some days will still be messy and that this is not failure, it is humanness. So yes, I still suck at this some days. I still mask when I'm tired. I still overcommit, over-explain. I still crash. But I also recover faster and I rebuild smarter. The irony of writing a book about leadership and safety while still figuring out my own is not lost on me. But maybe that's the point. Leadership is not about having everything sorted. It's about being honest about what you're learning and giving others permission to do the same. Unmasking as a leader is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of leading without pretending.
If you are finding this series useful, subscribing really helps. It means you get each new chapter as it's released, and it signals to the platform that this content is worth sharing. Leaving a quick review also makes a genuine difference to Nicola. Reviews help this reach a wider audience, especially people who are looking for leadership, psychological safety, and neurodiversity content that goes deeper than sound bites. Thank you for supporting independent work like this. Back to the chapter.
A note on gender and perspective leadership challenges are not limited by gender. Many men, non binary, and gender diverse people also experience masking burnout and bias when their way of thinking or leading falls outside convention. I want to acknowledge that fully. Every neurodivergent leader faces their own version of the double bind, trying to belong in systems designed for uniformity. Neurodivergent men who are quieter, more sensitive, or more reflective than the leadership stereotype often feel the same tension that women do. Non binary and gender diverse leaders experience this in even more complex ways, navigating expectations that were never built for them at all. That said, my swim lane is being a woman. My lived experience shapes how I see the world and how I write about it. The lens of this book, and especially this chapter, comes from that perspective. It is not intended to exclude anyone, but rather to speak from where I stand, a place of personal experience, observation, and reflection. I know there are countless other stories worth telling about neurodivergent leadership across every gender. I hope this book adds to that conversation, not by speaking for others, but by contributing one honest voice to the growing collective of people reimagining what leadership can look like when we stop pretending it has a single shape. Key insight. Neurodivergent leaders do not need to be taught resilience. They have lived it. What they need are systems that allow them to lead without depletion and cultures that recognize authenticity as strength. For women, that means dismantling the myths of perfection, politeness, and performance that have defined leadership for too long. When women lead as they are, they redefine what leadership looks like for everyone else.
Thank you for listening to Unmasking Leadership. By choosing to listen to this work in full, you are supporting deeper conversations about leadership, safety, and inclusion, and the space to sit with ideas that are often rushed or avoided at work. Your support makes this project possible. Until next time, thank you for being here.